Hello, my curious communicators. Welcome to the video Stump the Professor edition musical chairs. So thank you, Roundtable Team Musical Chairs, for these excellent questions. I am really hoping I can get through my notes in a timely way. I really worked on these. These really got me thinking, and I appreciate the thought you put into creating them. All right, so team musical chairs, here are my responses. The first question, when power is unequal, what does genuine collaboration look like? And how can a person with more power avoid placing the burden of adaptation on the person with less power? So when power is unequal, this is great. And this is really, we're talking about institutional authority. I did address this in a different way in a different video, but there's a lot of overlap here. It is me. So we want to talk about unequal power. That means when you're in a group and you actually have different roles, that it's explicit that someone has more power than the other person. I don't mean to uh, over explain that, but I think it's good to clarify. These can be informal titles as well, like parents and children, or elders or grandparents and grandchildren. These are kind of more informal titles, but then when you're in institutions where the title that goes with your name places you along a hierarchy, an actual ladder within an organization, a ranking, you might say. And if you're part of that organization, you might know the secret code to those titles, like assistant professor, associate professor, tenure track professor, full professor, like, oh my gosh. So there's a whole system of decoding and ranking. And so in this question, how do you do collaboration when you have this, I want to say it's an umbrella. It is a little bit of something that is creating a constraint, but it's kind of working as an undercurrent. So I'm not sure where you'll have to help me with which one you think it is. Is it more of an undercurrent or an umbrella? But it is definitely casting a shadow over how to get to collaboration. Or it can, it doesn't necessarily have to. And there are tools and ways. So I'm going to go over a couple of ideas on how to approach this. So we need to acknowledge that organizational structure has rankings and different roles, and people's roles are laid out, and there's descriptions and notebooks and checklists, and everyone is doing different things. And then when you're in a team, let's say you have an office and everyone's supposed to be on the same team, but there's a clear ranking and there's rungs on this ladder. And each rung on the ladder, kind of especially when we look at business patterns in business communication, often things are stacked up that this person tells this person and this person tells this person, and they keep going down to the last person on the rung of the ladder. Everything gets kind of dumped into there, right? So there are all these weird inner office kind of dynamics like that you could be trying to navigate through. And when you're at the top of the ladder, it's hard to see them. Definitely want to talk to that person who is occupying the lower rung. You're going to get a much clearer idea of you're not a, I don't know if clears, you're going to get a different perception of what's going on. And that is valuable to you if you have the institutional authority. All right. So let's talk also about what is genuine collaboration, because that's a really important piece of this. So when we talk about genuine collaboration, we're really talking about levers of influence and impact. is someone not only have a voice to voice what's going on, but does their information have impact on outcomes? Or am I just playing lip service to something I learned about functional teams, give everyone a chance to talk at the table, but where is the impact coming? And what is what is truly in the breadth of your control versus the control of that is doesn't have to be in your control. If you're the person with the we're looking at this position, looking over the group, right? Or yeah, I'm not sure how to say that. I don't think that's the right way. I bet you guys can think of a great way. Oh wait, what? I can't hear you. Okay, I'll just wait till you make your video and I'll listen then. Um, so I'm going to tell you some of those ways that you can take the burden off of trying to create the container and control of a situation, even with the leadership role of authority in the room. Uh, First of all, meetings are usually reported as the worst part of a day. The worst part of my job is the meetings. We hear that over and over and over again. I think at this point it's pretty clear we cannot functionally get rid of meetings, but can we improve the quality of a meeting? And one of the ways to improve the quality is to can you cancel a meeting? Do we really need this meeting or can it be a memo? We don't want to over rely on chat groups that are available through business software like Teams has a video conferencing kind of like Zoom, but they also have running chats. Google has running chats. You don't want to over rely on these type of things because they are interruptions and distractions, and they can often become a place of informal chatter because they mimic social media structure, and it's hard to discern the parameters of informal to formal discussion. I think that's a whole communication class right there. I don't know if I can get much more into it. But the whole point here is what needs to be a meeting? Is the meeting scheduled for every Monday morning at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m.? Everyone has to check into a meeting, the morning huddle. Sometimes groups call it a huddle. Or can you give you're like, wow, actually, the things on this agenda are things we don't have to address this meeting around, and I'm going to bump them to the next one, and I'm canceling this meeting. As soon as you give the gift of time to a team, if you have the institutional authority to run a meeting, to facilitate a meeting, then you have the institutional authority to cancel a meeting. And it's also that can be, and then you might say, someone might go, oh, I really needed to meet. I was going to bring this topic up. Invite them over and say, hey, do you mind if you and I just talk about that and turn that into a one-on-one? And then you can get a more different type of interactions kind of sprinkled in there. And they're like, nope, I need it for this situation. And then you can discern from there what the right decision is. Let's say it is a one-on-one. Let's say you have to have a one-on-one with someone on your team. And maybe it's for feedback or a performance review, right? These are when it's clear you have more authority than the other and you need to check this meeting off your books. With this person, you have all the authority in that moment. But there's some things that you can give away power on. You can balance out the power. You can ask the other person to, what this is what we need to talk about. When would you like to meet? I need to meet before the end of the week. Do you have a preference for day, time, and modality? Like, give away something. let go of control over all aspects of it. And if the other person doesn't seem interested in grabbing those levers or those rings, then be ready to step in and say, okay, no worries, I got it. I'll just put something on here. Sometimes, but that's kind of when we talk about the difference of someone who has authority and leadership. Leadership is how we step up and take responsibility, and we understand the obligation of inclusion in the process with the other person. Okay. Another thing that we can think about is we have meetings, we have one-on-ones. What can we give up? I'm going through my list here. Okay. So let's say you're tasked with collaborating towards a 5-year plan, or there's something in the product line that there's some issue going on with the deliverables in your organization, and you think you're coming in like it's a process goal. There's some interruption in the system, in the product line to get this deliverable out, or we need a 5-year plan because we have economic hardships coming our way, and we're going to have to tighten our belts and batten down the hatches. You're coming in with a direction. And I think it's good to say, hey, we have this issue. If I want to move into true collaboration means everyone needs to be agreement on what is the problem. And that means you need to open up and be curious about how everyone is perceiving the issue, experiencing it, in what inside information can we include, and can we get a clear, concise definition of the problem before you just come in and say, there's a problem with our distribution or our deliverable timing, and we need to fix it. Well, maybe they're saying, actually, someone might think the problem is in the team process or the management process. Maybe it's a problem in a mechanical issue, or maybe it's the computer software you're using. Like everyone's might have a different idea depending on how they have hands-on in that, whatever that situation is. Or sometimes someone knows something that's happening in other departments or other groups, and that person can almost be a bridge of information from one group to another group. And who are those superpower people who can help you work on defining that problem from a different point of view? So who gets to define the problem has a lot of power. If you have the institutional authority, allowing room for the group to define the problem, and you're a facilitator of that discussion, and you allow your voice not to be the dominant voice of definition, now you are not exercising your institutional authority over the outcome or the solution. And this is really important because who defines the problem gets to imagine the solution. And collaboration it's going to be a collaborative process, which means we need a collaborative way to look at the problem. And as soon as that clicks in, you're going to spend 2/3 of your time just on the problem. But if you can really spend the time it needs to get the problem defined, and it may take more than one meeting, then your solution is going to click. It's going to click together like puzzle pieces that good feeling when you put the right puzzle piece in, just feels so good, right? So we want that feeling to the solution, and we want everyone walking away invested in that solution and ready to get out there and do the work of implementing it. And that type of buy-in happens with collaborative defining the problem. All right. Yeah, I just made this note here. I'm reading in my notes. I made a little note here, and I just love the way I wrote this down. Genuine collaboration begins before the solution making, just to punctuate that. I think it's really important when you're in a collaborative environment is not to pretend there isn't a hierarchy. If there's different roles and people have different positions, don't ignore that. The people who have those titles that have put them through promotion or earned expertise, those titles are really important to honor the individual in the group and what what they're bringing to the group. Think of it like kind of an honorary thing. So we don't want to pretend that there's no hierarchy. That can be its own problem in itself. It's how are people using their title to control the conversation, control outcomes, or if their own insecurities are based on that someone has to be below them, there's not usually room for that in a collaboration. So we want to make sure there is room and space for influence. I use that word a lot. I feel like in all three of these videos that I've made, this is the last one on my list to create that I have been talking a lot about influence. And so your team, if it's going to be in true collaboration, it needs a lot of skills. It needs to have a shared understanding that difference is valued here, that we aren't going to fall into groupthink. And sometimes means you might too have to assign someone in the room the what if role, or I'm not sure that's going to I'm not sure that's going to work role. This is really important part of teams is the difference between someone who is always like the negative, I don't think that's going to work, they're rolling their eyes and they just kind of pull the energy down. That is usually a personality situation that is different than what I'm talking about, where we're talking like the 10th man rule or the 10th person rule is that idea that we need someone we're going to assign it. We're going to be explicit and assign you the role of saying, are we considering this? Or I actually am going to vote no because this person over here brought up an issue that was really important and we aren't addressing that in any way. And so I need to push the pause button. And that's another way to distribute power in a group is giving someone the 10th person role in a meeting. And it has to be used very carefully. And it's more like it has to be a container. It can't just come up anytime. You have to make a bubble for it, like put it on the agenda that we need that discerned voice. And when we value that voice and we make space for it, it allows for us to be challenged and to get feedback and not just fall into groupthink because we're not going to get collaborative if we're just with people handling difference or uncertainty with fawning, meaning that they just fall into, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, that's a good idea. Oh my God, there's so many good ideas here and a good idea and a good, right? We definitely want the energy of thinking about things in a way and trying to play them out, but we don't want it to be a default because no one's afraid to speak up. Okay. Also, we want to balance in collaborative spaces the difference in the way people communicate, which is why in this class we looked a lot at communication and conflict. We looked at power dynamics. There's also other systems of communication that are based in introversion and extroversion and allowing introverts room to respond in ways where they can actually form their thoughts instead of extroverts often don't mind being put on the spot or talking out loud to as a thought process. Introverts, they might be over talkers in a one-on-one and they might use that talking through to get to their point when they're allowed, when they don't have a big audience. And so, how do we make room for introverts to ideas to be included? Here's how I think about it. Extroverts, they're so great. They're just going to jump right into the problem. They're going to be in the middle of the mix. They're going to like, oh, I know what the problem is. They just jump right in and they've got all these things to say. And everyone is sitting back and going, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And that's where we can lose the influence of other perspectives. And it's why you sometimes need a communication norm of process. So the extrovert doesn't, who's helping us out with their energy and ideas, but it doesn't become a vacuum and we lose the oxygen for other perspectives to be included. And I don't think extroverts are doing that on purpose. I think that they're highly valued in our culture and business world, and there's a lot of rewards, and that the system is kind of built in a privileged way towards extroverts and their process. And they usually rise to positions of authority because they are willing to jump in and take risks and say things and think it through and make mistakes, right? Like they have all that energy. So if you get into an institutional authority position because you brought all this, how will you rewind that and make room? Or if you see that dynamic happening, how will you make a process for others to be included? Now, we don't want to just point to the person who's been quiet and go, you, you haven't been talking. What do you think? Because that can that can be a conflict in itself that can create shutdown or just like, oh, I don't know, or oh, I agree, right? Because being put on the spot is its own uncomfortableness. So how does collaboration needs to continue beyond just the room you're in? It needs to be, hey, we're going to work on this problem. Everyone come into the meeting with something they've thought about that they want to include as part of the problem. So assign homework before you come in the meeting. And of course, you don't want to call it homework. I'm sorry. I'm a professor. I'm going to call it homework. But you could call it, hey, here's an extra task before you come to the meeting. Make sure you take some time to think through this question. Just pose a question. Have them come to the meeting prepared. Or as things come up in the session you're in, say, all right, this was a good start. We can't finish it all this time. So as soon as you leave, I want you to make note of what we talked about and what we didn't talk about that we might need to address next time. And as soon as you make permission for space on the other side of the group collaborative space, you start including other voices. You decentralize that authority voice, whether it's coming up through your role as the team leader or from a high energy person on your team or a really overly negative person that you're dealing with on your team that is shutting down the conversation. All right, I have a lot more to say about that. Uh, oh my gosh, the last thing, I have one more thing to say about this one, because the last part of this question is placing the burden of adaptation on the person with less power. We want to avoid, how do you avoid placing the burden of adaptation on the person with less power? I think a lot of the protocols I just mentioned there's a lot of different ways to do this. And I just really want to address that. I really like the way this question is worded because I do think adaptation is a type of burden. It means you are in a place of cognitive complexity. You are considering other points of view, and you are considering motivation and culture and systems and power systems of, like there's all these things that have to be considered. And that is a type of burden. And if you always put the burden on the person with less power, oh, well, I want to make sure everyone's included. And you come to your team, how should we do that? That's a great question to ask, but the whole burden shouldn't be on them. You should come in with an idea of your own and or be able to propose things. I think if you're in an organizational leadership graduate school program and you are taking on the lifestyle of being a leader, you are saying, I'm going to put on this awareness that of adaptation. And adapting and being appropriate are all things that we can do to balance out the power and the dignity of roles and hierarchies that we all kind of find ourselves trying to navigate. All right. That was question number one. Oh my God. I'm just laughing at myself. I have so much to say about things. All right. Let me take a little bit of water. The next question is avoiding really a lose-lose conflict style if it allows for successful resolution at a separate time? So, yeah, I think this is great. This means I like this questions because it means you're thinking about the way all these concepts we've been learning in this class are overlapping, and some of the vocabulary is chosen is we're using vocabulary because it's fitting into a theory, and the theory has taken that word and redefined it within the research that they've done, and they are seeing a certain pattern and applying this word to it. But that's not always the way we use that word when we are in our regular everyday world outside of an academic theory. And you don't fit in a box, right? Theory is a box, and then there's life, right? Here's life, and here's this little box. And the box really means someone proposed a question, they tested it, they gathered evidence, and they tracked patterns. And this is why it's really important that we are continually passing the baton on to the next group and the next generation, because we are in an ever shifting environment and not everything holds up in time. Now, this is one of the reasons why we are looking at so many different things, because some things are going to work in some contexts and sometimes they're not going to work in another context. I think the way this question is posed and where it lands in the term, it's really coming out of the Thomas Kilmann instrument modes and model, and that's that assertiveness plotted against cooperation. And avoiding, when it's placed in the TKI model, it is that we are not acknowledging that there's a conflict. Now, that's a very specific communication tactic or strategy that sometimes is very useful, or it's a way to keep us safe. It does come with serious consequences. It will usually erode trust. It usually is an indicator, not on its own. It's usually going to be in a cluster of other issues as the writing on the wall that this relationship will soon is not going to have longevity. Maybe that's the way to say it. So if avoiding is, and when we avoid conflict as an individual, no matter the context or situation, we're always shifting into the flight and fawning, and those things that we do to avoid it, that's going to have internal consequences on our own repair and self actualization and our own agency. Remember, avoiding is also plotted in TKI as agency, as assertiveness. Do you have a voice anywhere in your life? Do you have a voice? And these can often have really big consequences if someone is constantly choosing avoiding to survive one contextual conflict situation, like maybe at work. That's just the default for being on my job. I'm just gonna sweep it under the rug, look the other way. I'm got to just keep my nose down and get my job done. Uh, that the consequences might come out later when we are in a space where we have more power and more voice, and then we can become almost monsters in our personal spaces because we didn't allow ourselves room or agency in one, and we might be grasping for power in someone else. That's a really complicated family dynamic. Or if we think about angry driving or things, that's not always the reason those things are happening. There's a lot of issues, but we do want to think about that avoiding has serious consequences. It it basically means that no one is pursuing conflict management, no one is pursuing uh, curiosity or inclusion. Avoidance is can become a habitual pattern, and it is basically the refusal to deal with a difficult situation or a painful moment. That is different than pausing, right? If we need to pause or take a break, or stepping away from a conflict can often help us allow room, breathing space, or room, or create a different type of pattern where the constant pressure of the interrogation of the conflict gets a break, and each party involved or parties involved give more time to their positionality on the situation. Basically, that's one way to think about it. Um, I do think, again, this question uses successful resolution at a separate time. And I think it matters if we're talking about conflict resolution or conflict management. You've heard me say it a bunch of times, but several of the questions are really keep going back to this word resolution. And I really appreciate that because I'm the same way. I want my conflicts done, signed, sealed, delivered, done, right? But when we're in relational systems and we have to go in and out of jobs or families day in and day out, a better way to think about conflict is how we are managing conflict. And these words matter because when we use the word conflict management, we leave more room for space. We leave more room for uncertainty and tolerances of difference. Not every conflict is a project. Not every conflict is now we've got to move in and solve this conflict. Sometimes it's about the space we give to a conflict and tolerate that we're not going to litigate every single thing that comes through that I don't agree with. I don't think that's avoiding a conflict. Maybe you have a different idea about that. Uh, but having established you have an established relationship, which, or what, in whatever way that is, we have an established relationship, and it's life, and it's in conflict is inevitable. Different, you are a different person than the person you're in a relationship with. They grew up in a different family culture than the family you grew up in. They grew up in a different experience of their religion than you did. Even if you share the same religion, there's all different ways that people are experiencing that. So if you can acknowledge that there are things to be different about, are you avoiding a conflict, or are you putting a pause on it and making space? Or are you sitting in the difference and can walk away from it without it being a project that needs to be solved, but just allowing it, but allowing some difference to be a part of this? I think that's what we're real that's one of the things we're really working on in this class is developing your relational competency. So I talk a lot about communication competency, the avoiding, appropriate, adapting, cognitive complexity, empathy, all of these really, your imagination is a type of communication competency. And the word avoiding, I think the way you're using it is sounds like relational competency to me. It sounds like you're making room and space for difference and uncertainty. You are not using avoiding in this case as a tactic or strategy to not talk about a topic. There wasn't a specific example discussed in the team, so if this feels like I'm still not getting what you needed out of this question, I'd be really curious about how we could build on it to get an even better, sharper look at it. All right, let's talk about when is conflict unresolvable? That's the question. Question number 3 from musical chairs is, when is conflict unresolvable? So sometimes sometimes it's not about the conflict itself. Sometimes it's about when the conditions for dialogue are no longer exist, right? Not We always want to remember more communication is not always better. More communication can make things worse. And not all communication is good. Some communication can also be a weapon, and it can do great harm. And when we think about functional conflicts, we're looking at situations of dialogue, not monologuing, not needing to always agree. It's also the healthy choice of knowing the difference between allowing someone space and room to share their worldview, and the difference between uh, making room and space for that, and are they and knowing when they're making room and space for you, and are you being supported and listened to as well. I know I say that a lot, but it's so important. And someone could be really successful with laying out their argument, getting those facts out. I've got this fact, I got this fact, I got evidence, I've read this study, I watched this, I heard about this, I read this article, bump, 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 bump. They are a wall of facts. They have built brick by brick, and it is got good, strong supports and mortars and iron supports, and they know how to support their point of view and their perspective. But that doesn't mean they're relationally skilled. They could be relationally unskilled. In It doesn't mean every person who knows how to lay out an argument it doesn't mean every single time it means this, but it's something to think about. that when we are ready to move in and make our point to the point, to the place of this is my position and I'm going to win. I am going to get to yes. I'm going to make you agree with me. I'm going to get my way no matter what. And I have the evidence for my case and it's sound. That it could all be true. That could that could all be true. That does not mean that we are in a place that for dialogue anymore. There's also the flip side of that. You come in with facts and evidence, and the other person isn't even willing to listen or consider or take influence from that. So there's two ways this could kind of move at us. And it's really important to always flip these things and think about them from this point of view, and this point of view, and this point of view, and this point of view. The other, when a conflict is unresolvable, oh, we aren't in dialogue. We are also curiosity, which I gave a talk for the one of the other teams. Which team is that? And the Fantastic Four, I think. That can be it can be performative. Curiosity could be performative. So if someone's just pretending to listen and pretending to be curious about you, only to wait till they get the mic to make their point. So some people are really good at they're all armed up. They're ready for litigation. They're ready to go. And they come in with a question. Have I got a question for you? But it turns out that question isn't really curious about your point of view. It's really just a setup so they can come in with their stuff that they've gotten ready. That's more a performative curiosity, so we want to be aware of when we're stuck in those patterns. Is someone generally interested? Are they genuinely, not generally, I think I said generally, genuinely interested? Are you genuinely interested? These are things to ask yourself if you're trying to decide, is this unresolvable? All right, let me just look over. So also, let's say you are anteing up. Okay, you've taken this class, you've got all these tools, you are dealing with a conflict, and you're clicking through all the communication tools you have. You're clicking through emotionally regulating, making sure you vent in a private, safe space away from the conflict. You're really, really trying to take care of it. But no matter what you do, you're only met with that brick wall that someone has so skillfully constructed and built. You feel like every time you say something, you walk away kind of feeling um, like you risked too much, like you're not feeling safe uh, in being vulnerable and being open with the other person. I do want to say there is something called honesty that is weaponized. And we don't want to move into saying cruel things and then claiming honesty. Well, you told me to be honest, like let's take care of the situation, please. Honesty. There are ways to navigate that, and these are things that are worth saying out loud. I think most importantly, and this kind of goes with the last question I answered, is sometimes a conflict can't be resolved. Sometimes we have unresolved differences. Just like the team lifetime learners, how do you deal with a conflict that arises from cultural differences. Okay, I had to figure out my internet for a second. Sorry about that. A small pause. You don't see it except a little bit of a jump cut. Uh, I do like to bring these videos unedited. So as I wrap up this question here, I did want to think about this question in terms of conflict management and why that matters so much. If I were to reword this question or reframe it, maybe reframing it as a conflict management question, I would say, what do we do when resolution is unavailable? What do we do when resolution is unavailable? That's a really good thing to know about. What are your go-tos when this, instead of when is conflict unresolvable, which I think is a really important question, and then the sub question to that is, what do we do? Are we managing a relationship? Do we need to find common ground? Can we accept influence on that very small thing, even if we can't resolve the conflict, to move the relationship forward? These are really important things to know. Or is it a done and done? Is it a walk away situation? These are things you should know about yourself so that you can be equipped to regulate yourself and the choices as you're facing them. All right. We got through it, and I'm hoping the internet was stable through it all, and we got here. I really appreciate musical chairs, the work you did on these questions. They're just a really nice little set here. I can't wait to hear your reply responses. Bye, everyone.